Welcome to the Comedy Reset Spotlight. This is the place to be if you want to hear from some of the most innovative and exciting comedy creators from around the globe. On this podcast, you'll hear from a variety of guests who are pushing the boundaries of what comedy can be. If you're looking for fresh perspectives and new ideas, this is the podcast for you.
Episode 8. East Hampton, New York comedian, Kevin Byrne.
When did you first start doing stand-up comedy?
I first started doing stand-up comedy in December of 2015 as part of the culmination of Stand-Up University.
What made you want to become a stand-up comedian?
What made me want to be a stand-up comic? Well, I always had a knack for being funny, and I grew up watching the late night comics, Johnny Carson, and just thought it would be something that I'd at least want to try once in my life.
Who were some of your influences?
Some of my comic influences, the late night comics. Johnny Carson was always funny, and people that he'd have on his show like Gary Shandling, Bobby Collins, Dennis Miller, guys like that.
What was your first time on stage like?
My first time on stage was great. I enjoyed every second of it. I did about a little over 5 minutes at the brokerage, and it was part of the graduation of Stand-Up University, and I got a ton of laughs, and from that moment I was hooked.
What's your favorite joke?
My favorite joke? I have a joke. I always love jokes that lead the audience one way and then quickly shoot them back another way. And I have a joke about my house being broken into, and they trash the place and eat my wife's leftover meatloaf, and they get caught, and they're sentenced to community service, which turns out to be teaching my wife to make meatloaf.
What's the worst heckler experience you've ever had?
Thankfully, I haven't had to deal too much with hecklers. More often, I say I deal with people who are just talking during my set, or they don't understand a joke, so they're asking their friend. Things like that.
What's the best gig you've ever had?
The best gig I ever had was one that I helped co-produce. It was at the Stephen Talk House in Amagansett, New York, which is a very famous music venue that sometimes does comedy. And I used that to do a fundraiser for a 9/11 memorial, and we raised about over $5,000 for it. And I was very happy to both perform in basically my hometown, and to do it use comedy for a good cause.
What's the worst gig you've ever had?
The worst gig I ever had wasn't really all that bad, but I'd have to say it was a 2-night gig that I did with a couple comic friends at a Red Mango yogurt shop, which was very interesting. You had people coming in and out while we were standing there trying to do our jokes and get laughs, and it wasn't the normal. It was still pretty fun.
How do you deal with stage fright?
I don't really get stage fright per se. Um, Before a show, I will uh, say my act over and over and over, just basically to myself, and make sure that I'm prepared. And so I'm really not even thinking about the stage fright. It's probably there, but I'm so concentrated on uh, making sure I'm going to remember the jokes and what I want to say. So it really hasn't come into play.
What was the most unexpected response you've ever gotten to one of your jokes?
The most unexpected response I ever got to a joke was actually at my first show, where I did a joke and the audience universally booed the joke. Um, wasn't that I guess it wasn't funny, but they just didn't they didn't like it. And that was have to admit, it kind of threw me a little bit.
How do you prepare for a show?
I usually prepare for a show by just going over the set. Uh, Usually, actually, in my car, I will go through the set a few times, and just me driving wherever, and uh, do the set. And if anything isn't up to my liking, uh, I'll omit it from the set. But that's pretty much my process right before a show.
What's the best advice you've ever been given about stand up comedy?
The best advice I've been given is probably to just be myself. Just relax and be myself. The jokes are funnier, the jokes are better when they come from yourself, your own experience. At least that's what I find.
What's the worst advice you've ever been given about stand up comedy?
The worst advice I've been given is, well, sometimes people will say, try doing this to one of your jokes, or try doing that to one of your jokes, and it doesn't work. Um, I think the comedian knows what works best for themselves. Now, sometimes the advice is very good, and it becomes the new normal, everyday way to tell a joke, but it doesn't happen every time. So you have to really be careful about the advice you get on your jokes.
What would you say is the biggest misconception about stand up comedy?
The biggest misconception about stand-up comedy, I'd say, is that the hardest part is the show. Um, the hardest part for me is actually the fun, is actually the payoff, is actually the easiest part of it. The hard part, of course, is the writing, the planning your set, the everything that goes into it, which is work.
What do you believe is the key to success in stand up comedy?
The key to success, I'd say just keep working. Keep working a joke, keep working a premise. It may take a while to find the joke. It may take 4 or 5, 10 different writings of the joke till you have it down. Uh, just You have to just keep working it. Just keep working the joke.
What do you think is the biggest obstacle that stand up comedians face?
The biggest obstacle I think comedians face is their own self doubt. You know, um, you have to believe in yourself, and you have to believe in your material and the work you've done. I think that's the biggest obstacle, and there's a lot of obstacles to be sure, but I think it all starts with believing in oneself.
What do you think sets stand up comedy apart from other forms of comedy?
I think what sets stand-up apart is the immediacy of it. It's you get that instant feedback on a joke, and you can't beat that. It's immediate. It's there. It's raw. It's not faked. It's not artificial. I think that answers that question.
What are the benefits of stand up comedy?
I think for me, uh, the benefits of stand-up comedy are that it's very therapeutic. A lot of my jokes come from just everything I've done during the course of my life, and I can think back and take situations and find the funny in them. So I think that's very therapeutic.
What's your process for writing jokes?
My process of writing jokes is first something comes to me, some part of it, either uh, the setup or the punch will come to me, and often I'll write it down in a very raw form, and sometimes even go back to it later and just play with it and use about 4 or 5 different index cards to uh, get the joke down, and then play with it and see which version works best.
What's the most important thing for a stand up comedian to remember?
The most important thing for a stand up comedian to remember is remember your jokes, remember your act. Opportunities are few and far between with stage time, so you don't want to forget a joke or a couple of jokes, because you'll be kicking yourself when you get off stage and you forgot to tell one of your best jokes, and that does happen. So you have to memorize your act over again. Absolutely.
What do you think are the best techniques for dealing with hecklers?
The best technique for dealing with hecklers? Well, I haven't had too many situations with hecklers, but my mother always said just to ignore certain people, and they'll go away. And I think that can work with hecklers too. The good thing also is that if the crowd is good, if the crowd is into it, they will police themselves and they will handle the heckler for you.
What do you think are the biggest mistakes that stand up comedians make?
The biggest mistake stand up comedians make is not doing the work, not performing enough at the open mics, not going over their jokes to make them more concise, to make them funnier with different words, not putting in the time that needs to be put in to really make a funny set. I think that's the worst uh, disservice that comedians do to themselves.
What is the best way to learn stand up comedy?
The, the best way to learn stand up comedy is to observe it, observe the people that are doing it, see how they handle the microphone, see how they deliver a joke, get a sense of what comic timing is, and then go out to the open mics and see where you're at, gauge your own progress, record your sets, and try and improve every single time out. I think that's the best way to learn.
What do you think is the best way to improve as a stand up comedian?
The best way to improve is probably to just keep refining your act. There's always room for improvement. Keep working at it, keep refining it, add to it. I think that's probably the best way to improve.
What has stand up comedy taught you about yourself?
Stand up comedy has taught me that I can be funny. I am funny. I can make people laugh. Um, but it's also taught me that I can laugh at myself and that it's okay to laugh at myself, which I never did before I started doing stand up. You are the one person that it's okay for everybody to laugh at. So just be comfortable with it.
What motivates you to keep performing stand up comedy?
What motivates me? Uh, the next big laugh. Getting that next laugh. It's addictive, and that's what motivates me to go out there and pursue that next big laugh.
What advice would you give to someone who's thinking about doing stand up comedy?
My best advice to anyone who wants to try stand up comedy: just do it. It's something that everybody wants to try, but not everybody is willing to try. So you may as well go ahead and put the fears aside and just go ahead and give it a try.
Is there anything you'd like to add that we did not cover?
Yeah, I guess I would just like to add that uh, you know, comedy seems to be becoming a bit of a lost art. So if everybody just did their part to, support comedy, live comedy, wherever they can, if you're having a charitable event and you're looking for something, consider doing a comedy show. Because it really is becoming a lost art in a lot of ways. And that would be a shame if comedy disappears completely.
I've been your host, Rob Chaffee. Don't forget to laugh today. It's good for you. Comedy Reset Spotlight is a podcast that brings you today's freshest and funniest comedy creators. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to hear more.